Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. As Lori mentioned, this is the 2024 Subrecipient webinar. My name is Reed Kottman, and I'm joined by Courtney Springer, who will present a little bit later on. As Lori mentioned, if you have any questions as we go through the presentation, please do not use the chat, but use the Q&A feature, which is at the bottom of your screens. All right. Just as a quick disclaimer before we start, the contents of this presentation are intended to provide clarity regarding the existing requirements of the FTA and NTD. Please always feel free to refer to the statutes and regulations for the requirements. The goal of this webinar is to identify changes for the upcoming report year and provide an overview of NTD reporting requirements and how to apply those requirements to the system. Again, this presentation has been created specifically for rural general public transit subrecipient reporters. Here's the agenda for this afternoon. First, I will do a quick overview of the NTD and then move on to important changes and clarifications for the 2024 report year. Next, we will review the fundamentals of NTD reporting, and we will discuss how to get started in the NTD 2.0 reporting system. Then Courtney is going to take over and discuss how to complete the annual report, including some common reporting challenges. Lastly, we will review the validation and the closeout process. Here's the contact information for the National Transit Database. If at any point you require technical assistance while completing your report, please first reach out to your state DOT. If you encounter any technical issues with the system, like bugs, you may contact the FTA IT help desk, seen here on the slide. If you are in need of assistance with accessing our published data products or have questions about them, please feel free to email our help desk between 8 a.m. and 7 p.m. Eastern Time. Courtney and I's contact information is listed here. Please reach out to us if you have any questions about this presentation. In addition to our contact information, we also wanted to provide the FTA program contacts here. They are Chelsea Champlin and Thomas Coleman. First, let's start with a quick overview of the National Transit Database. Oh, sorry. We're going to go over the key reference documents first. So these are the key reference documents for NTD reporting. These will include the policy manual, of which we just have an updated copy for report year 2024, the glossary, the user guide, and the transit asset management guidebooks. So now we are going to start the overview of the National Transit Database. So what is the National Transit Database, or NTD? NTD was established to be the nation's primary source for information and statistics on all public transit modes in the United States. It's a source of data for performance measurement benchmarking, as well as research. Recipients and subrecipients of Chapter 53 funds report to the NTD. Subrecipients of State 5311 funds report data through their state's report. These subrecipients may include those that have received funding in the past and are still required to report based on continuing grant requirements, as well as some who report voluntarily and wish to receive Chapter 5311 funds in the future. So 5311 recipients and subrecipients are required to report due to their grant requirements, as stated here from the associated legislation. Data from the NTD is used for several things. Some examples include performance benchmarking, research and statistics programs, formula apportionments of funding, and reports that are delivered to Congress, all seen here on the slide. NTD data is due on the following dates: October 31st, January 31st, and April 30th. These are assigned depending on your agency's fiscal year end. Your state DOT may have internal deadlines that subrecipients must meet before the state submission due date, so please reach out to your state DOT if you have any questions regarding your report's due date. All right, now we are going to jump into the changes and clarifications for report year 2024 and how they may affect your report. So first, we'll go over the GTFS recertification. As you already know, GTFS data was a new requirement for report year 2023 that required agencies who operate a fixed route mode to upload GTFS data for the service. In report year 2024, state DOTs will recertify the current GTFS data in the system and update the current GTFS data if there have been any changes to the fixed route mode operated. If your agency requested a waiver for this requirement in report year 2023, you will need to upload GTFS data in report year 2024. So if your agency's fixed route service has indeed changed, please proceed with updating the GTFS entry to reflect the service changes that were made. You can update the existing GTFS entry by navigating to your agency profile and selecting the P50 form, which we'll go over accessing later in this presentation. If you require assistance with your GTFS data, please feel free to use the resources provided by National RTAP, which are included here on the slide. These include their free GTFS builder, as well as open office hours on Thursdays between 1 p.m. and 1:30 p.m. Eastern. The next item for clarification is regarding question number 8 of the B15 form. Now, the B15 form was new for report year 2023, and there was a lot of questions swirling about question number 8 particularly. To clarify, the B15 form should include all of your agency's demand response services, which could include paratransit and dial-a-ride services if you operate both. Question number 8 should depict the eligibility of all of these services for each day of the week. Typically, there should only be yes marked for multiple columns in question number 8 if your agency has multiple services with different eligibility for each. Please use this slide as a resource when determining how to report your agency's demand response service eligibility on question number 8 of the B15. You can access these definitions on question 8 of the B15 form by selecting the blue question mark by each eligibility column. If you are unsure as to how to report your service's eligibility, please contact your state DOT. Another clarification for the B15 form, question number 9 should report the minimum advanced reservation time for your agency's demand response services. If your agency requires passengers to reserve a trip prior to a certain time the day before, please report 1 day for question number 9. If your agency's demand response services have different reservation times, please report the shortest reservation time of all of the services. For question number 10, please report the most commonly charged fare for your agency's demand response services, excluding special discounts. If the service does not require fares, but does accept donations, please do not report a value for question number 10. Donations should not count as fares on the form. As a reminder for the B15 form, the data will pre-populate from last year's report. So in report year 2024, please review that data and revise if needed, but it should all already be there. If additional assistance is required, you may contact your state DOT or National RTAP for additional assistance. Another clarification for report year 2024 concerns agencies splitting data between multiple NTD reports. If you and another agency have an agreement where you operate routes that span both of your agency's service areas, you may split the service by reporting the route that you yourself operates. However, agencies may not split individual vehicle trips between NTD reports. If you have a situation like this and you're unsure of how to report it, please contact your state DOT and they can contact us if additional assistance is needed. The final report year 2024 clarification is for vehicles with adaptive seating capabilities. Some vehicles have the ability to add or remove seats to increase cargo space or passenger accommodations. If your agency is reporting a vehicle with adaptive seating, please report the full seating capacity of the vehicle on the A30 form, regardless of its current configuration. So, for example, if a vehicle has a potential seating capacity or maximum seating capacity of 15, but only has 12 seats installed, please report the seating capacity of 15 for the vehicle on the A30 form. All right, we will now move on to system updates for report year 2024. The View Previous Year Data Link is a new feature that will allow you to quickly reference the prior year's report form. For example, when viewing the B10 form, you can select the View Previous Year Data link to pull up the prior year's B10 form in a new window. The View Previous Year Data link is now available for all forms in the annual report package and is located in the top right. Question number 8 of the B15 form has also been updated to include low income as a service eligibility option. Low income is included in the same service eligibility column as age or disability, but please note that this column can be marked as yes if the service is open to either option. It does not need to be both age or disability as well as low income exclusive. New for the A30 form, a prompt will now appear when updating the active vehicles field to 0. This prompt will ask you to confirm whether or not you wish to retire the fleet. As a reminder, please do not delete fleets on the A30 form unless they were added in error. A UEID is an agency-specific identifier used to import agency information from SAM.gov. For agencies who report a UEID, please review the P10 form and confirm that your UEID is up to date, or add one if it's not already there. All right, so that's all for our updates for report year 2024. Next, we will move on to a review of NTD reporting fundamentals. When reporting to the NTD, the service must be public. Once that is determined, the mode comes next. Here on this slide are the most common modes in the rural module: demand response and bus. Bus service is defined as a vehicle powered by a motor and containing fuel within. It can include services that have route deviation, point deviation, or deviated fixed routes. Demand response service is defined as a service scheduled in response to calls from passengers, such as a dial-a-ride service. Another popular mode in the rural module is the commuter bus mode. To clarify, commuter bus operates with more than 5 miles of closed-door service, and the same type of vehicles are used consistently on that service. If you think you have both bus and commuter bus service, please keep in mind that the vehicles shouldn't be used between the services on the same day. This also applies to drivers' work assignments, which are typically separate between the two modes. If you are currently reporting both commuter bus and bus service, and you only believe that you may need to report one of these modes, please contact your state DOT for assistance, and we can help them with determining how it should be reported and provide the steps on how to change this in the system if appropriate. The next topic we'll cover is types of service. Currently in NTD, there are 2 main types of service: directly operated and purchased transportation. Directly operated is when the service is operated by the agency and uses the agency's own employees. Purchased transportation is when the vehicles are operated by the seller's employees, the service is branded as the buyer's, and the buyer is paying the full cost of the service. Within the purchased transportation category, there are 2 main types: TX for services operated by a taxi provider, and then TN for services operated by a transportation network company, or TNC for short. If the service is operated by a contractor that is neither a taxi provider nor a TNC, the type of service would remain as PT or purchased transportation on the report. After the mode and type of service are determined, the next question is what data should you be collecting for these services? Here are some of the data points, as well as the abbreviations that are used throughout the presentation and on the annual report. These data points are collected on a per mode and type of service basis, except for sponsored unlinked passenger trips, which are only collected by demand response mode types. These are all common acronyms that you will see throughout NTD materials. We will first cover vehicle revenue miles, VRM, and vehicle revenue hours, VRH. Revenue service is when a vehicle is transporting passengers or is able to transport passengers. This includes layover and recovery time. Revenue service does not include deadhead, driver training, school bus or charter services, as well as vehicle maintenance. Now, as I mentioned in the previous slide, deadhead is not reported in your revenue service. This includes leaving or returning to the garage or yard facility, changing routes, or when there is no expectation of carrying passengers. There are detailed tables found within the NTD policy manual, which provide further examples of what is and what is not considered revenue service. We will review these tables in a couple of slides, so look out for those. Now, some transportation services, such as emergency services and non-passenger services, are not reported to the NTD, as long as they do not meet FTA's definition of public transportation. Please omit things like food delivery and financial and service data from these services from your NTD report. Now, FTA defines public transportation as open to the general public. Although the NTD excludes services that are only open to specific groups of people, the NTD does accept transportation services for segments of the general population defined by age, disability, or low income. Additionally, FTA defines public transportation as being shared ride, which means that rides can be shared by passengers with no affiliation to one another. Floating vehicles are used to provide a quick response to breakdowns or passenger surplus. Floating vehicles' miles and hours data is reportable to the NTD, but only when they are dispatched. Please do not report miles and hours data for floater vehicles that are on standby and have not been dispatched. Now here's that table that I had mentioned, which is an example for the demand response mode of what is and what is not considered revenue service. Please note that the time and miles from when the vehicle is dispatched from the garage to the pickup of a passenger are not considered revenue service until they reach the pickup point. On the other end of that example, the time and the miles from the last drop-off back to the dispatching point are also not considered revenue service. Following up on that previous slide, this is an example of the bus mode and what is not considered revenue service. Again, from the garage to the first stop of the route is not considered revenue service, and then from the last drop-off point back to the garage is also not revenue service. Both of these tables are found in the policy manual and may be helpful to review if you have questions as to what to report for revenue service. Trip brokering is defined by the FTA as a central clearinghouse that connects riders traveling between similar origins and destinations at approximately the same time. This service is reportable if brokers connect riders from client-specific transportation services to public transportation. Agencies should report the service data and revenue received from this program as organization-paid fares. Please note that trip brokerage must still be considered public transportation to be reported to the NTD. Accepting passengers through a brokerage from a general public demand response program does not make the vehicles open to the public. Additionally, if a client-specific nonprofit provides trips assigned by a broker, then those trips are not public transportation and should not be reported. Unlinked passenger trips, or UPT, should represent the number of passenger boardings during the reporting period. Passengers are counted each time they board the vehicle, no matter how many vehicles they use from their origin to their destination. When reporting unlinked passenger trips, please include all passengers. These passengers are usually classified as either regular or sponsored. When reporting UPT on the RR20 form, there should be a total number of passenger trips, both regular and sponsored, reported for UPT. For demand response, you will report sponsored trips as a subset of the total UPT. Sponsored trips are services that are paid for in full or in part by a third party. These may be part of a coordinated human services transportation plan. Common sponsors include the VA, Medicaid, and assisted living centers. As mentioned on the last slide, The sponsored UPT should be reported as a subset of the total UPT, or unlinked passenger trips, for all demand response mode types. Vehicles operated in annual maximum service, or VOMs, are the number of revenue vehicles an agency operates to meet the annual maximum service requirement. VOMs are counted during the peak season of the year on the busiest day. This count should include any volunteer vehicles that were used in maximum service. This shouldn't be the number of active vehicles your agency has in service, but rather how many vehicles are used at once on the road during peak service. NTD reporting requirements for financial data follow generally accepted accounting principles and accrual accounting. In accrual accounting, the revenue is recorded when earned, regardless of when the payment is received. And expenses are recorded when the liability occurs, regardless of when the payment is actually made. Please see the examples here and in the policy manual for more detail. When reporting your data to the NTD, you will report the funding you spent, not the amount your agency was awarded. Here on the slide is an example. If your agency was awarded $275,000, but only expended $178,000 during the reporting period, you would report the $178,000 instead of the $275,000. Next, we will review the types of expenses. First up is operating expenses. Operating expenses are the day-to-day expenses that a transit agency incurs. These may be for the operating and maintaining of vehicles, maintaining of other equipment, planning costs, admin costs, as well as other examples seen here on the slide. Capital expenses are those related to the purchase of equipment. Equipment means an article of non-expendable personal property having a useful life of more than 1 year. The equipment will have an acquisition cost which equals the lesser of the capitalization level established by the government unit for financial statement purposes, or $5,000 as determined by the FTA. Lastly, we will cover capital assistance spent on operations. So this is when capital funding is spent on activities that are normally considered operating. This includes preventative maintenance and the purchase of tires. Please make sure to break this out of your other operating funding, as this has a different match percentage. There is a separate field for this on the RR20 form for certain funding sources, such as 5311, as seen here on the slide. If your agency has more than 2 modes, the operating costs will be broken out between the modes based on the direct and shared expenses. Once the direct expenses for each mode are identified and broken out, the remaining shared expenses may be calculated between the modes based on a cost allocation method. Please note that this is only acceptable for shared expenses. There should still be some expenses that are direct to each mode. Here's a quick overview of the TAM rule. Those that receive Chapter 53 funds and either own, operate, or manage capital assets used in the provision of public transit are required to report data for their assets. For recipients of 5310B1D, if they do not provide public transit services, they are not required to report under the TAM rule. With regards to how the data is reported, for those in the sponsored state DOT plan, you will report the assets associated with the plan on your individual package. However, the targets and the narrative report will come from the state DOT forms. If you have your own TAM plan, you will report all of the assets, the targets, and the narrative report. Now, states may have Tier 2 participants as part of their TAM plan, and these will mostly consist of 5311, 5310, and small urban providers. States are required to sponsor a plan. However, agencies may opt out of the plan, but if they do this, they must submit the target, the narrative report data themselves. So we're going to mention capital responsibility multiple times throughout this presentation with regards to TAM plans. Please see the list here to determine whether or not an agency has direct capital responsibility for an asset. As a note, for the third bullet point, an infrastructure asset itemized as a capital line item in the budget does not necessarily mean an agency has direct capital responsibility. An agency must also have management or oversight responsibilities for the line item project. In addition, performing minimal preventative maintenance work doesn't necessarily indicate direct capital responsibility for an asset. All right, next we will review the NTD interface and account user management. The NTD homepage is found at www.transit.dot.gov/NTD. This is where the data products, policy manuals, and a clickable link to go to the reporting system are all housed. You will click on the blue link that reads, "If you're a non-FTA user, click this link to log in." From there, it will prompt you to log into the system through login.gov. Please make sure to set this up with the same email address that you use for NTD reporting. In addition to an email and password, login.gov will require the use of at least one secondary authentication method, such as a code delivered through a text message or phone call. Once set up, whichever method was chosen will be used when logging into the NTD reporting system. After logging in, all users land on the homepage. The Appian platform, which houses NTD, trams, and faces. Here, you will select NTD in order to access your report. If you would like to automatically go into the NTD site every time you log in, you can click on the star at the top right of the NTD box, and this will save your preference. The NTD homepage allows the user to directly access their NTD report from the front page by selecting the folder icon or the pencil icon. Next is the Tasks tab. This section will house any tasks that are currently assigned to you. To access the report packages, you will want to ensure that you are first on the homepage. From here, you will select the Annual tab, and it will populate any open NTD reports for your agency. You can access the forms one of two ways. You can either click on the NTD ID with the folder icon on the left, which will direct you to the report package summary page. This route will also allow you to access related actions for the package. But if you would only like to edit the forms, you can click on that pencil icon on the right side of the page, and the system will take you directly to the clickable list of forms. To access the reporter profiles, you will want to first ensure that you're on that homepage or tab. You will select Profile instead of Annual, and your agency profile will load. The profile is where you will edit your mode, agency basic information, as well as view other users from your agency. To view the individual forms, you will click on the pencil icon on the right side of the page, which will allow you to access the P10, P20, and other profile forms. To access other profile options, click on the NTD ID folder icon on the left. Once you click on that NTD ID and folder icon, you will see the profile summary page. Here you can go through the related actions to edit those P10 forms that you would have gotten to by selecting the pencil icon. The emergency contact information is located within that P10 form. This is pre-populated from the prior year, so please review the contact information to ensure that it is up to date. If the emergency contact does need to be changed or updated, please proceed with updating their information and selecting Save at the bottom right of the P10 form. Next is the e-file library. This is where you can filter through communications from prior years as well as this report year. The form library is where you can see data from previous years that has been submitted to the NTD. You will use the drop-down menu to select the package, and then the link in blue for whichever form you would like to view. These are all downloaded in HTML format. In addition to viewing the forms, under the Related Actions tab of the profile, you will be able to print the previous year's report packages in full rather than form by form like in the form library. Other actions you can complete here are viewing and editing those profile forms that I had mentioned earlier. Those include the P10 or basic information form, the P20 or mode form, and the P30, as well as the P50 if your agency operates a fixed route mode. If you select the print button when you select the print annual report package option, it will prompt you to download the selected annual report package. This will take you to a new page where you will see a refresh button. Please wait a few minutes and then click on that refresh button. When the package reloads, you will select refresh and the downloadable link will appear under the reporter name. Click on that link and the report will download in HTML format. If you're already a user in the system and need to unlock your account, there are two different ways you can complete this. You can either unlock your account if you've set up security questions, which we'll go over on the next slide, or you can submit an unlock request. Now, if you submit an unlock request, the request will go to the user managers at the state DOT. It is important to note that even if you are locked out, you can still log into the NTD system. However, report forms will be unavailable until you are unlocked using either of those two options that I discussed. So as I mentioned, you can set up security questions beforehand, which should make unlocking your account that much easier. So to set up these questions, first you'll go to the top right-hand corner of your screen and select Profile. Then click on Related Actions, and then click on Manage Security Questions. From here, the system will provide steps to create those security questions for your account. Self-reporting subrecipients have the ability to enter and edit data for their own forms. This privilege is granted by the state DOT and is completely optional and at the state DOT's discretion. While self-reporting subrecipients can edit and save forms, only the state DOT can submit the annual report package. Subrecipients should contact the state DOT for any questions or technical assistance needed while completing their report. All correspondence with the NTD analyst should first go through the state DOT contact. Again, the due dates your state may impose on you could be different from the NTD deadlines. All right, now that you're logged in and have access to the system, Courtney is going to show you how to go through the forms and the validation of the report.
All right, excellent. Thank you so much, Reed. All right, so good afternoon, everyone. Again, my name is Courtney Springer, and I will be taking us through how to complete the annual report for 2024. So here's a quick refresher on the rural general public transit subrecipient type, as well as a list of their annual report forms. RGPT subrecipients are agencies that provide rural service and receive or benefit from 5311 funding, excluding urban agencies who also receive 5307 funding and also excluding tribes. We will cover each of these forms in more detail in the upcoming sections. To access your report, navigate to the NTD homepage and ensure the Annual tab is open, and then select your agency's report package from this list. From the report package summary view, select the Annual Forms button in the top right-hand corner to open the editable list of forms. Once the list of forms is open, you can select the hyperlinked form name to begin reporting. Okay, so the first form we will review is the identification or B10 form. If you completed an annual NTD report last year, the organization type you selected will carry over into this year's form, but you can update this selection if needed by using the drop-down to select your agency's organization type. Please also enter the fiscal year end date that corresponds to the 12-month period in which you're reporting your 2024 data. and this fiscal year end date may differ from your state DOT's fiscal year. The auxiliary sections are typically rare for rural agencies, so please do not complete this section without discussing it first with your state DOT contact. And when you have completed this form, select Save and Validate. Next, we will discuss the Geographic Area Coverage B15 form. This form was new as of report year 2023. So starting last report year, agencies with demand response modes began completing this form, which contains 10 questions about their geographic service area coverage. Agencies must complete one B15 form for each demand response mode and type of service combination that they report. If you completed the B15 form last year, your responses will pre-populate in this year's report. You should review your responses and ensure they are up to date. If you started a new demand response mode as of report year 2024, you must complete a new B15 form once you add the mode to your report. We will review each of the 10 questions presented in this report form. Some of the questions will be dynamic based on your selections to previous questions. So question 1 asks if you serve residents in another state besides your state. Select yes or no. Question 2 allows you to select the counties that your agency serves, either in whole or in part, where you pick up residents for a new trip origin. You should start by selecting Add, after which you can choose your state and report the counties. Question 3 allows you to select the census places that are served within each of your selected counties. And you can then report the service level in each census place by selecting wholly served or partially served. Please note that you can download the counties and census places reference file directly from the reporting system. So this report is an Excel file that populates based on the counties you entered in question 2 and will contain all of the corresponding census places so that you can complete question 3. Question 4 asks if any portion of your demand response service is intended to meet the Americans with Disabilities Act or ADA complementary paratransit requirements for a fixed route mode. Select yes or no. Please note that you should only select yes if your service provides the ADA paratransit for a specific fixed route system. The question does not refer to whether your service is generally ADA compliant. If you select yes, question 5 asks if your service area is limited to your own NTD ID, and if it is, select yes. If the ADA service serves other NTD reporters, select no. And if you select no, you should search for and select all other NTD IDs that your service covers. Question 6 asks if you have different passenger eligibility requirements or different terms and conditions of service. Select yes or no. Question 7 asks which days per week you operate, for which you should select the applicable checkboxes. And when you're done selecting your days, select the button Create Days of the Week on the right-hand side of this page. This will populate your selected days in question 8. For question 8, you should first report the service begin and end time for each day. You will also answer basic questions about these services as seen in the column headers under question 8 shown in this screenshot, and Reid discussed the recent reporting clarifications for this question at the beginning of this presentation. If you have any questions about these specific items, please contact your state DOT, who will reach out to their NTD validation analyst if they have further questions. Question 9 asks for the minimum advanced reservation time for the service. Enter the numeric minimum, then indicate whether the number corresponds to days or hours. As a reminder, as Reid mentioned, if you require passengers to reserve their trip by a certain time the day before the trip, report 1 day. Additionally, if different services within the demand response mode have different advanced reservation requirements, you should report the shortest minimum advanced reservation time required. Finally, question 10 asks for the fare charged for this service. Again, you should not include donations in this field. We encourage you again to contact your state DOT if you have any questions about the reporting requirements for this form. Next, we will discuss the A10 Stations and Maintenance Facilities form. The A10 captures the type and number of maintenance facilities your agency uses for public transit. Report facilities based on the ownership types for those facilities. So whether they are owned by your agency, leased from another public agency, or leased from a private entity. The definition of maintenance facility is a garage or building where mechanics perform routine maintenance and repairs and typically serve as operating garages. Please note that you should not include bus barns in this count, nor should you include any third-party facility where you might bring your vehicles for repairs, such as a Jiffy Lube. If one facility is shared by 2 or more modes, you should report an allocated share between the applicable modes. This could be based on any data point that indicates how much of the facility is used per mode, but one of the most common approaches is to allocate the facility based on the number of vehicles it services. So to look at an example, let's say an agency owns 1 maintenance facility and operates both a demand response service and a fixed route bus service. Both modes use this maintenance facility, and the agency owns 20 vehicles in total. The demand response mode runs 15 vehicles, and the bus mode runs 5 vehicles. In this example, we would expect to see 0.75 facilities reported in the demand response A10 form and 0.25 facilities reported in the bus A10 form. Please ensure that the total number of facilities you report across all A10 forms equals a whole number. Next, we will discuss the Transit Asset Management Facilities Inventory A15 form. The A15 form collects basic information on facilities that your agency uses to supply public transit service. On this form, you should report administrative and maintenance facilities for which your agency has capital responsibility, and you should report all passenger and parking facilities that your agency uses in public transit service, regardless of who has capital responsibility for those facilities. Please note that if your agency reports a maintenance facility as owned on the A10 form, we would generally expect that facility to appear on the A15 form as well, as long as your agency's transit use for that facility is greater than incidental. To complete this form, select the Add New button, followed by Add Facility. This will allow you to begin entering data for that facility. You will complete 3 sections per entry, and that's update facility information, update condition assessment, and update address. In the interest of time with covering all of the RGPT report forms and requirements, we will not dedicate time to going over each of the individual A15 reporting fields, but we do encourage you to review the NTD policy manual or contact your state DOT if you have questions. Your existing facility information will pre-populate from report year 2023, so you will only need to add new facilities if needed or update the information for existing facilities, again, if needed. If you do not have any reportable facilities, please select the No Data to Report checkbox prior to saving the form. Next, we will review the Revenue Vehicle Inventory A30 form. If you completed this form last year, your data from report year 2023 will pre-populate, which again means you will only need to add new fleets or edit existing fleets as needed. You can enter new fleets by selecting the Add New Fleet button, or you can edit an existing fleet by selecting the RVI ID link for that fleet towards the left of the table. When adding a new fleet, the first section you will see is basic information. You should complete all required fields for this fleet. Some examples of the fields in this section include vehicle type, total vehicles, ownership type, and funding type. The next section is vehicle information. Again, complete all required fields in this section. Fuel type was introduced as a new field for RGPT subrecipients in report year 2023. The selections you reported last year will populate along with the rest of the fleet data. Transit agencies must report the number of active vehicles in each fleet as of the end of their fiscal year. Total vehicles represent how many vehicles there are in the fleet you are reporting. Active vehicles indicates the number of vehicles that provide regular service and includes spare vehicles, whereas inactive vehicles may include any of the following: vehicles that are awaiting sale or disposal, vehicles that are in storage or are part of an FTA-approved emergency contingency plan, or vehicles that are out for major repairs. As a quick reporting reminder, please remember to mark fleets as retired in the reporting system if the vehicles have been sold or disposed of, rather than deleting the fleets. To retire a fleet, update the number of active vehicles to 0, after which you will see the automated prompt asking, "Is this fleet retired?" for which you should select yes. You should only delete fleets if they were added to the form in error, or if you are removing a duplicate after using the add existing fleet function. The next form is the Service Vehicle Inventory A35 form. Agencies must report service vehicle fleets for which they have capital responsibility. Service vehicles include cars used for administrative staff, transit police cars, and tow trucks. Because service vehicles must be roadworthy in order to be reported, agencies should not report small forklifts or golf carts or any type of construction equipment that is not roadworthy. This form works in a similar manner as the A15 form. To create a fleet, select Add New. Please ensure that you report revenue vehicles on the A30 form and service vehicles on the A35 form. So in other words, you should not report vehicles on the A35 form if the vehicles are also used to transport passengers. Report the service fleet information for this vehicle fleet. Select the vehicle type from a drop-down menu, which consists of 3 options: automobiles, trucks and other rubber tire vehicles, and steel wheel vehicles. Automobiles are passenger cars up to and including station wagons in size. If you have a service vehicle that is a minivan or anything larger, report them as trucks and other rubber tire vehicles. Estimated cost is the most recent estimate of the full cost to replace the fleet. If you do not have a recent estimate, you may report the original cost of the fleet or its insured value. You must also report the year that corresponds to the dollar value that you report. Save and validate the A35 form once you are finished. Similar to the A15 form, if you do not have any reportable assets, select the No Data to Report checkbox prior to saving this form. The Rural General Public Transit Reduced Reporting RR20 form contains your agency's financial, service, and resource data. When you open the RR20 form, the first 2 sections are total funds expended and funds expended by mode. The funds expended section allows you to manually input your operating and capital expenses for each mode that you operate. In this example, this agency operates 2 modes: demand response directly operated and bus directly operated. The agency reported an annual total of $325,000 in operating expenses and $250,000 in capital expenses, and reported the corresponding annual totals for each mode in their respective fields. Please note that these totals are rounded just for example purposes only. So you should report all funds that your agency expended towards public transit service. Do not limit your expenses to federal grant programs. In the subsequent sections of the RR20 form, you will identify the various sources of funds that supported your transit system. We will cover the different funding source categories in the next few slides. As you begin to report your funding sources, the system will automatically calculate a running total in the total funds expended section. So in this example, the agency has reported all of their funding sources, which totaled $325,000 for operations and $250,000 for capital. The sum of your funding sources typically match what you entered in the funds expended section, as shown in this screenshot. So the operating expenses match as shown by the totals in red, and the capital expenses match as shown by the totals in green. Agencies that operate more than one mode are required to capture and report actual expenses by mode and type of service. If you have more than one mode, you should determine which expenses are direct expenses and can easily be traced to a specific mode. Direct costs may include driver wages or vehicle repairs for specific modes. For the remaining joint or shared expenses, which are costs that are incurred for the benefit of more than one mode and cannot be traced, you may allocate those remaining costs. An example of shared costs may be a transit manager's salary that supports both the demand response and fixed route services. You may allocate shared costs using an allocation factor, such as vehicle revenue miles, unlinked passenger trips, vehicle revenue hours, or number of employees per mode. The next section of the RR20, which begins the different funding source categories, is fare revenues. Fare revenues include all income received and expended directly from passengers, which include donations made on board a transit vehicle. This section is broken down between passenger paid fares and organization paid fares. It is also broken down by mode and type of service if your agency reports two or more modes and types of service. Passenger paid fares are those that are traditionally considered as passenger fares in which a rider pays to board the vehicle. This category includes full adult fares, senior citizen fares, student fares, child fares, and fares for individuals with disabilities. This section also includes donations that are made on board a vehicle in lieu of paying a fare. Organization paid fares are those that an organization pays for or pays through a third party rather than the passenger. One common example of an organization paid fare is a university paying a transit agency to allow students to ride fare-free. Funds expended from Medicaid for non-emergency medical transportation, or NEMT, should be reported as an organization paid fare. If your agency operates more than one mode, you must capture and report the fares by mode and type of service. There are some exceptions to this requirement as listed here on the slide, and if your agency's fare policy meets either of these criteria, please notify your state contact so that they can communicate that to their analyst during validation if needed. In most cases for rural reporters, fare revenues can be tracked for each mode and therefore should be reported as actual data and not allocated. The next funding source in the form is other directly generated funds, which are funds other than fares that your agency directly generates. Some common examples of other directly generated funds are advertising revenues, concession revenues, fundraisers, park and ride revenues, interest on investments, contract revenue for any non-full cost contracts, and donations and insurance recoveries. And again, when we say donations for this field, this refers to lump sum donations that may come from local charity foundations or fundraising events or private individual donors. This does not refer to donations made on board the vehicle. If you report funds to this field, a required text description box will appear. Revenues accrued through a purchased transportation or PT agreement should only be reported if your agency receives revenues from another agency who pays the full cost of a transit service you provide, as long as it meets the NTD definition of purchased transportation. It is not common for rural agencies to report funds to this field, so please discuss this with your state contact if you think this field applies to your service. The next funding source category is non-federal funds. Enter the data based on what funds your agency expended from local funds, state funds, and other non-federal sources. Local sources include tax levies, general funds, and finances from local entities. State sources include state programs that support public transit, but do not include the Chapter 53 funds that a state DOT may pass through to your agency, since Chapter 53 funds are federal in origin. If you report other funds similar to other directly generated funds, a text description box will appear, so please ensure that you enter a description of those funds. In the federal funds section, select all applicable federal funding sources from this list of programs. Once you select a box, the corresponding data entry fields will populate to the right. If you report funds to any other category, such as other federal funds or other FTA funds, you will be required to provide a text description to describe that funding program. Examples of other FTA funds include those not already listed in the RR20 form, such as Section 5308, FTA Clean Fuels Program. Other US DOT funds will include funds that come from the Department of Transportation that are not FTA funds, such as funds from the Federal Highway Administration. Examples of other federal funds include funds from a non-FTA or non-DOT federal grant not already listed in the form, such as Housing and Urban Development or HUD funds. The various COVID-19 relief programs, such as the CARES Act, CRISA Act, and American Rescue Plan Acts, are listed separately in the RR20 form. These programs provide emergency assistance and healthcare response for individuals, families, and businesses affected by the COVID-19 public health emergency. Please report funds expended from these programs to the appropriate field as applicable in the RR20 form. After you complete the financial data section, complete the other resources section if it applies to your agency. So here you'll report the number of volunteer drivers and the number of personal vehicles in service. Please note that you do not report personal vehicles on the A30 form as revenue vehicles. You should only report them in this section. And if the section does not apply to your agency, please enter zeros into these data entry fields rather than leaving the fields blank. The next section in the form is annual service data. When reporting miles and hours, you should only include those miles and hours in which your transit vehicles are operating in revenue service, which again is when the vehicles are transporting passengers or have the capacity to transport passengers. Unlinked passenger trips should reflect each instance in which a passenger boards a vehicle and should include personal care attendants who ride fare-free. Please note that while you report sponsored service unlinked passenger trips for certain modes in a separate data entry field, the total unlinked passenger trips should represent all ridership for the year, including regular and sponsored trips. So in other words, you should not deduct sponsored UPT from your total UPT. The next form we will briefly cover is the A90 Transit Asset Management Performance Measure Targets form. If you do not have a group TAM plan sponsor, you will complete the A90 form in your agency's report package. If your state DOT is your group TAM plan sponsor, you will see a read-only version of the group's A90 form. The A90 form reflects the performance measure and performance targets for all assets for which your agency has capital responsibility. The performance measure relates to your agency's assets that have met or exceeded the useful life benchmark, referring to vehicles, or based on the condition assessment for facilities. You should also upload your agency's narrative report at the bottom of the form. The narrative report outlines the targets your agency set in this form, the progress towards those targets, and any changes within your transit system's operating environment. Again, if you have a group plan sponsor, the sponsor will report on behalf of their participants, and the form will represent the plan for the whole group. Next, we will discuss the Safety and Security SNS 60 form. This form was new as of report year 2023. The bipartisan infrastructure law requires the NTD to collect data related to assaults on transit workers. Agencies who report to the NTD must report all assaults on transit workers, even if the assault does not result in an injury. RGPT subrecipients began reporting expanded safety data in the new SNS 60 form beginning in report year 2023. Here is an overview of the first two sections in the SNS 60 form, physical assaults and non-physical assaults. The statutory definition of assault on a transit worker is a circumstance in which an individual knowingly, without lawful authority or permission, and with intent to endanger the safety of any individual, or with a reckless disregard for the safety of human life, interferes with, disables, or incapacitates a transit worker while the transit worker is performing their duties. Here's a refresher on the two assault type categories, physical and non-physical. Physical assaults involve physical contact with a transit worker and can include any contact with the attacker's body, a weapon, a projectile, or another item. Physical assaults can include the assailant's saliva as well. Non-physical assaults do not involve any physical contact and can include threats, intimidation, or interfering with the worker's duties. Here's a refresher on the 4 different location options. On the first screenshot, we have physical assaults in transit vehicle, physical assaults in revenue facility, physical assaults in non-revenue facility, and physical assaults in other location. And the options are identical for non-physical assaults. A revenue facility is a facility or area that passengers use to board or deboard from a transit vehicle using a platform. A non-revenue facility is a facility or area that is not used to enable individuals to board or alight from transit vehicles and is primarily staffed by transit employees. The other category includes locations that are not in a revenue or non-revenue facility and is not a transit vehicle. The third and final section of the SNS 60 form is all other reportable safety and security data. The first 3 rows refer to the following collision types: collisions with pedestrians, collisions with vehicles, and collisions with other, which can include things like an animal, manhole, or shopping cart. Please note that you should only report safety events to these categories if they meet a major event reporting threshold, which are outlined in the NTD policy manual for reduced reporters. If you have any reportable collisions that meet this criteria, you should report an annual count under the major events column, and you should then report any corresponding fatalities or injuries resulting from the collision if they are applicable. Next, report a count of other major events, which are major safety events excluding collisions that meet a major event reporting threshold. Some examples of other major event types include fires, security events, hazardous material spills, or acts of God. Report account of other major events in this section, as well as any resulting injuries or fatalities, if applicable. Again, the reporting thresholds for major events are detailed in the NTD policy manual for reduced reporters. We encourage you to review the thresholds or reach out to your state DOT if you have any questions about this section. The last field in this section is total reportable injuries from non-major events. These are events that are not included in the major event categories like collisions, fires, or hazmat spills. And so non-major event types include slips, trips, falls, smoke events, fumes, and electric shock. If any of these events result in a fatality, evacuation, or property damage exceeding $25,000, you should report them as major events. You should also report these as major events if they result in 2 or more injured persons. If these events do not meet the fatality, evacuation, or property damage thresholds and only result in 1 injury, you should report them under total reportable injuries from non-major events. So for example, if a smoke event results in 1 injury, that would be reported in the field total reportable injuries from non-major events. However, if that same smoke event resulted in 2 injuries, that would be reported under other major events with 2 corresponding injuries. So that concludes our overview of the annual NTD report forms. We will now cover a few common reporting challenges agencies may encounter when completing their NTD report. Reporting challenges can take shape in a variety of ways, including understanding the NTD policies, completing data entry correctly, completing all required forms and fields in the report, and addressing validation issues. Analysts will send reports back with open issues if they have follow-up questions regarding the report data. Validation includes, but is not limited to, time series checks against your agency's historical data, logic checks between data items on different forms, and checks for values that fall outside the typical industry range. To resolve validation issues, you can either revise the data to reflect accurate information or provide a text explanation that addresses the issue to establish accuracy. One common reporting issue relates to allocating operating expenses. As a reminder, agencies may not allocate their total annual operating expenses if they operate 2 or more modes or types of service. Rather, they must first determine which expenses are direct costs and attribute those costs to the appropriate mode. Agencies may then allocate the remaining shared costs to each mode and type of service afterwards. Agencies should not allocate their total operating costs without following the steps detailed above. Another reporting challenge agencies may experience is reporting the appropriate funding sources for their service. Please ensure that your agency reports all funds that support your public transit service rather than only reporting, for example, just the federal funding sources. Please also ensure that your agency reports the funding sources to the correct line item year over year, such as local funds, state funds, other directly generated funds, and 5311 federal funds. Agencies should only report service data for when they are operating revenue service. Revenue service does not include deadhead. Therefore, deadhead should not be included in the data that is reported to the NTD. Deadhead is when transit vehicles are operating closed door and do not carry passengers. This includes leaving or returning to the garage or heading to or from the starting or ending points of revenue service. This can also include changing routes or when the driver does not have the duty to carry passengers. Vehicle revenue miles is an apportionment formula factor for 5311 funds, so this data is validated closely. Agencies should report the vehicles operated in maximum service or VOMs based on the number of revenue vehicles the agency operates to meet the annual maximum service requirement. This includes volunteer vehicles that operate during peak service periods. Agencies might erroneously report 100% of their active vehicle inventory as their VOMs. This would be correct if your agency operated all of its active vehicles during peak service during the year. However, agencies typically retain spare vehicles that do not operate during peak service times. If the VOMs you report on the RR20 form is identical to the number of active vehicles you report on the A30 form, the state's analyst may ask about this during validation for confirmation. When agencies report new vehicles, they typically also report the corresponding capital expenses on the RR20 form. One validation issue that comes up is that agencies will either report the new vehicles on the A30 form or the capital expenses on the RR20 form, but not both. As a reminder, you should report capital expenses for new vehicles on the RR20 form when the vehicle has been delivered and accepted by your agency. You should also add the vehicles to your inventory once the vehicle has been put into revenue service. These may fall between two different fiscal year periods, but they often fall within the same year. Agencies must inventory the vehicles that they use to provide public transit service on their A30 if the vehicles have not been sold or disposed of at the end of the fiscal year. The inventory should represent a snapshot of the last day of the fiscal year, and new vehicles must be reported in the first fiscal year when they become available for service. Agencies should not limit the revenue vehicle inventory to federally funded vehicles. You should report all vehicles that are used in your agency's public transit service, regardless of the funding source. So after your state DOT submits the report, there are a couple more steps that must be taken in order to completely close out the report for the year. The state's validation analyst will review the entire report for accuracy and consistency. They will compare the data in this year's report to the data submitted in last year's report to look for any significant changes, ensure that all forms have been completed, and check to see that the data has been reported to the correct fields. If the state's analyst asks about any data changes from last year to this year, please avoid providing generalized responses such as the data is correct, since these types of responses do not offer a clear explanation for why the data changed. The more information or context you can provide early in the reporting process could help reduce the number of report turnovers before the report is closed out. Here is one example of a validation issue within the asset module. An agency reports a bus as being 35 feet long in year 1, but updates this to 25 feet in year 2. A validation check will fire since vehicle length typically does not change year over year. So there are two main possibilities in this scenario. One possibility is that the data was reported incorrectly in the previous year, and the agency made a data correction this year. In this case, the agency would simply provide this explanation in validation and would not update this year's data. The second possibility is that the agency erroneously updated the data in year 2, and the original data from year 1 was actually correct. In this case, the agency would navigate back to their A30 form, revert the vehicle length back to 35, and resave the form. Once the analyst has reviewed the report, they will return it to the state to resolve the open validation issues. As the report revision count increases, the revision time period decreases, as the report should have fewer and fewer issues with each submission. Be sure to address any items that were cited in last year's closeout letter. If you fail to correct any issues stated in the 2023 closeout letter, that data may be marked as questionable in report year 2024. Here is a sample summary page of a report package. This table lists the number of open issues as well as total issues. The table also shows which forms have been validated, which appear as green, and non-validated, which appear as red. In this screenshot, none of the forms have been validated yet, which is why they all appear in the table as red. To recap, each report form has a regular save button as well as a save and validate button. If you save and validate the form will appear as green on the summary table. However, if you make changes to the form afterwards, you must save and validate the form again. If you make changes to a form that has already been validated and you hit the normal save button, the form will revert back to red and it will not turn green until you save and validate it again. There are two ways to view your validation issues. The first way is to open an individual report form, scroll down to the bottom of the page, and then click on View Issues to review the issues just for that form. Another way is to review your issues from the report package summary page. This will open a page that contains all of the validation issues in your report across all forms. The View Validation Issues page lists all of your open issues. If you click on the issue line item once, it will highlight in dark blue. After the issue highlights, scroll down the page to review the issue's validation issue language. You can either comment in the comment box with an explanation and save your response, or you may choose to click on the View Related Form button at the very bottom to make any updates directly in the form if needed. Notes in the closeout letter will typically relate to incomplete reports, which could mean either the data does not conform with NTD definitions or accounting principles, or it could mean that the agency did not adequately respond to validation issues raised by the analyst. If you respond to a validation issue and notice that the state's analyst has kept the issue open with a follow-up question, please avoid copying your original response and pasting it as your follow-up response. Please also avoid copying and pasting the same response across multiple validation checks if the checks are asking about different service characteristics. All identified issues must be sufficiently addressed in order for the issue to be considered resolved. If there are unresolved outstanding issues when the report is closed, FTA cites them in the closeout letter. The best way to resolve validation issues is to provide thorough and detailed explanations that give the state's analyst a clear picture of your agency's transit service. Explain why the data changed from last year, or explain what service changes took place to cause a significant increase or decrease in your data. If you find that last year's data was incorrect, please provide the correct value if you have it, or provide an explanation for why it was incorrect. Please note that FTA does not accept this response for multiple report years. And that concludes our presentation for this afternoon. Here's the contact information for our team, as well as the NTD Help Desk, which is open Monday through Friday from 8 a.m. to 7 p.m. Eastern Time. Thank you again to everyone for joining us this afternoon. We've had a lot of really great questions so far. I will now turn it back over to Lori to close us out.